Welcome to Inside the Castle, the podcast that goes behind castle doors to have real conversations with real people about solving the nation's toughest challenges.
I'm one of your hosts today, Aaron Snyder.
And I'm Angie Fryerman. In this episode, we're discussing congressional details. For those of you not in the federal government, one of the best trainings a federal employee can complete is a detail, which is a temporary assignment to a position and sometimes even a different organization. I know personally I've gained so much from the details I have taken. How about you, Aaron?
Yeah, most definitely. I think it's really probably been the most rewarding part of the job is the different opportunities that the Corps of Engineers has and just being able to see how the organization functions. So I'm really excited to hear from our guest today about working for Congress and really going behind the scenes as to what that means.
Well, that's enough about us. Let's dive into congressional details. With us today is Leuck and Mackie McIntosh. Thank you both for being here today.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started into the conversation, we always like to get to know our guests. So, Mackie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at USACE?
Sure. My name is Mackie McIntosh. I've been with the Corps since 2003. I started as a geologist in the Savannah District, doing technical investigations that supported all of our programs, civil, military, and IRP. I moved upward and onward into project management and planning, and eventually as the Chief of Civil Works of the Savannah District, where I oversaw the budgeting, planning, and execution of that program, including the $1 billion Savannah Harbor Expansion Project. After being in that role for about 6 years, I took the detail over at the Senate Authorization Committee, the Environment for Public Works. And now I am a program manager at Headquarters USACE, working on the Emergency Supplemental Team, where I manage the IIJA program, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Corps portion of that.
And Lauren, how about you?
Thanks, Angie. Yeah, my name is Leuck. I started with the Corps in 2009. I actually came as a Presidential Management Fellow, which is a federal fellowship program. And I started with the Institute for Water Resources. And so worked there for a number of years before actually taking a detail at headquarters at working with the Revolutionized Civil Works team. So on the Revolutionized team, I've been working on strategic communications and the alternative delivery program with Aaron, working on the Corps' water infrastructure financing program and the public-private partnership program, which we are now calling the alternative delivery program. While I was doing that, this opportunity for the detail assignment over at the House of Representatives came up, and I was lucky enough to take on that opportunity.
So both of you have completed these details with Congress. Could you talk a little bit about the detail and what your responsibilities were while you were there? Lauren, let's start with you.
Sure. So I worked for the House Appropriations Subcommittee for Energy and Water Development, which oversees the budgets for the Department of Energy, the Corps, as well as Bureau of Reclamation. And there are also a number of smaller independent agencies that committee oversees. While there, I worked on what we would call the water team. So I worked on the Corps and Reclamation budgets while I was there. I worked on putting together the fiscal year 2022 Energy and Water Appropriations Bill specifically for the Corps and Reclamation. The task of putting together the bill, included evaluating requests that we had received from members, a lot of analysis on earmarks because those started back up in fiscal year 2022, and in the House, those are known as community project funding requests. I also wrote language for the appropriations bill and report. There were a lot of spreadsheets too, a lot of analysis of data and information in spreadsheets and, other things like putting together memos and talking points and things like that. I also worked on putting together the Disaster Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or DRSA, as well as the various continuing resolutions that we had, unfortunately, in fiscal year 2022 before passing the final bill. And I did do a little work related to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
So I took a detail to the Senate Authorization Committee, which is the Committee on Environment and Public Works. I was there from January 2021 to January 2022. And in that role as the Corps detailee, I participated in a lot of WRDA 2020 oversight activities. So when it comes to hearings to discuss how the Corps was implementing certain WRDA provisions, I was involved in writing all the memos and doing the background research and writing the questions and the lead-ins to the questions for the committee chair at the time, Senator Tom Carper of Delaware. I also participated in certain discussions and negotiations related to the Drinking Water, Clean Water Investment Act, which at the time, that's primarily an EPA bill, but it was very closely related to a lot of things in the Corps' purview. So I participated in those discussions, which eventually became a part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It was a really exciting time to be on the Hill, participating in the development of related bills for other agencies, and then the very genesis of the WRDA 2022. That's how I ended my time, which was gathering, doing background research, writing legislative text along with help from our council services that will eventually form the core of the WRDA 2022, which we just received a markup for, I believe, this past week.
So you mentioned WRDA, and can you talk a little bit about the process of putting together a WRDA and what that all entails?
Certainly, it's challenging to say the least. I was there during kind of a different part of the cycle. So like I mentioned, I did a lot of oversight on the previous WRDA because it had just passed. And so we really didn't start developing WRDA 2022 until about halfway through my detail. But the process was it was fascinating and it was super fast paced. And the way it starts is pretty simple. You look at the previous WRDA and the drafts and all the different provisions that may have fallen out. And you look and you assess to see if there's a need to maybe try and reinsert those and bring those back up to the top. And then we look at all the chief's reports that have been provided to Congress and any other decision documents. And we obviously compile a list of all the projects needing authorization, make sure their paperwork is in order. And then we also do a lot of outreach. So it's a lot of listening. We hear from non-governmental organizations, NGOs. We listen to their concerns and their needs about Corps' performance and future direction that they want Corps policy to go. We do the same within the Corps. We talk with Corps senior leaders. And, for me, based on my background, reached out to those that I had relationships with and, just asked what were their biggest challenges, things like that. So kind of get this overarching buckets of policy areas. And then as you get those underneath your belt and you see what the repeating answers are, you start to narrow in and focus on how that can eventually become a provision that may be helpful for the Corps to implement those policy changes in the future. I mean, that's the nuts and bolts of it. Once you get all that together, we present that, of course, to the boss, and we say, these are the big major areas we're focusing on. He or she redirects based on their discussions with other members, and we move out from there. So we will negotiate. In my case, I was on the majority side. So we would then contact our minority counterparts and say, hey, this is where we're headed, get a feel for what we can agree on and what's going to be achievable versus those that are just nowhere near agreement. And we focus on that 80% that we can agree on, and then we start negotiations from there. That's about where I jumped off, and Maylee Boyce has since taken my place. She participated in those detailed discussions, which has resulted in, like I said, the draft markup bill, which was provided to the Corps last week.
Thanks. That's really interesting. And listening to you talk, it kind of made me think we need to tell our listeners about the process here and how it works for the Corps of Engineers. Or we're a two-step agency. We both get the authorization, which is one bill, and then separately we get the appropriations. And that authorization bill really is that foundation. And it kind of made me think back to civics class and even that kid's cartoon that talks about the idea and how it becomes a bill. So it's really important for the Corps to get these ideas, they become the bill, but that just authorizes the Corps to do things. And then there's another step before anything can actually be done by the agency. That's the appropriations. And Lauren, you worked on the appropriations side of things. Could you tell us about the process of putting together an appropriations bill and how that works?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to lay it out there, Aaron. So yes, you need the authorization, but you also need the appropriations, which is the money side. So I worked over with the House Appropriations Subcommittee mid-April of 2021 is when I started, and I completed my detail about the end of March of 2022. And during that time, I really got to participate in the whole process of the appropriations bill. It took a little bit longer this past year than we would normally like, but part of the reason was because we were a little delayed. The president's budget, that's usually where that kicks off the appropriations process when the president's budget request is released. This in 2021, it didn't happen until the end of May. So about the end of May, the fiscal year 2022 president's budget was released. What we typically do is start with that request. Then they will hold a number of budget hearings to talk with political appointees and members of the administration about the president's budget. So congressional members will have questions for our leadership to better understand the budget and what the administration's priorities are. And then after those hearings complete, we'll usually have member requests due. So House members will put in requests about what they would like to see in the budget. And then what the Appropriations Committee does is analyze those requests along with the president's budget request and move forward with compiling the appropriations bill. That's generally the process. Again, things were a little wonky this past year because of the timing of the president's budget release, but that was generally the process that we followed. So the appropriations bill and report, and one thing to know is that each appropriations bill does have an accompanying report, which contains more specific directions to the agencies, but it still has the same standing as law. So for our folks out there, our listeners who are members of the Corps especially, it's always something to look at when the appropriations bill is passed, is also look at the report for those specific directions on projects and programs that the Corps moves forward with. We have the appropriations bill and report. Those are first passed out of the subcommittee. So the Subcommittee for Energy and Water passes the appropriations bill and report, and then they go to the full Appropriations Committee to be passed out of that committee, and then eventually to the House of Representatives. So that occurred in the month of early in July of 2021 when we got the Energy and Water bill passed to the House of Representatives. So after that occurs, then you wait on the Senate to pass their bill, which they did. But then after that, you have to wait for congressional leadership to come together and really decide on the allocations that each bill receives. And this past year, that's where we had a holdup in terms of majority and minority coming together to determine those top line numbers for the bills. But once we get our allocation for each bill, then we can proceed to conference. And so in conference, all four corners come together to negotiate the final appropriations bill. And four corners, what that term means is House majority and minority, and Senate majority and minority. And so that's what they call the four corners. And so all four sides come together to negotiate on numbers for each account. So taking the Corps' budget, so we negotiate numbers for each account as well as funding levels for different programs and projects. And so there's a lot of back and forth during that time. Again, a lot of spreadsheets being traded in terms of offers. But once we are in agreement, then we finalize the bill and report and move forward with voting it through the House and then the Senate, and then eventually signed by the President.
All of this is so interesting, and it really does provide a new perspective. And I'm sure that both of you have a different perspective coming back to your jobs at the Corps. And so, Mackie, can you talk about this newfound perspective and then share a couple lessons learned?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and that is like y'all spoke in your introductory remarks about details and the value of them throughout your career. And, you know, that gained perspective, you can't even put a value on it because you don't know what you don't know. And to get out and see how the Corps at large and other projects and other MSCs interact with these committees and the challenges they face, to see that from a national level, even if it's from the other side of the fence, is tremendously valuable. And I'm so grateful that I was able to have that experience. For me, myself personally, I interacted a lot with North Atlantic Division because the senator I worked for was from the state of Delaware, and that was his servicing MSC. even that, I made a lot of relationships in North Atlantic Division as part of my kind of oversight and watching those projects that he had personal interest in. And what I learned several things, and beyond just my own personal experience and career growth and ability to bring that back to my job, I learned the Hill works at a lightning pace, and you don't get it until you're sitting in the chair working 14 hours a day and having someone tell you, I need it now, we're going to the floor now, blah blah blah. When we do technical analysis on draft legislative text in the Corps, which usually comes through future directions down to the district and then back up, that responsiveness is absolutely critical, depending on where the Congress is in their bill cycle. And I learned that firsthand. So while I thought we were always being responsive from a district level, I know that it has to go through so many levels of review before it comes back to the Hill. And that can be extremely challenging when you're sitting in the chair on the congressional side. Because you may know the answer and you may have a personal feeling or a view about it, but until you get that official response from the agency, you really can't move forward. And sometimes it's too late. Sometimes those things get dropped and you just have to move on to the next. So that was certainly a lessons learned that I think the staff should take away, is that future directions, they're a great group and they have so many balls in the air, but that response time is critical to being sure that sometimes your project moves forward. The other lessons learned that I took away from the authorizing committee specifically is that both the committee chair, Senator Tom Carper of Delaware, and the ranking member, Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, in general, they are fans of the Corps and they want to help the Corps deliver these critical mission areas and these critical infrastructure projects for the nation. They work together, which was really nice to see some bipartisan effort. They want to see some wins. They have tremendous influence on the future of Corps policy. So, building those relationships, whether it's at an enterprise level, whether it's at a local level with your congressional members, is really important. And of course, we have rules and limitations on what we can and can't provide and share. But in general, they can't help if they don't know what the problem is. So that was really a tremendous insight that I learned while I was there. And one last thing, if you take one of these details, it's an important point, is don't forget, you may be working for the committee staff, but at the end of the day, you are a Corps employee. And while you may be working for a certain office, majority or minority, you still come back and you represent the administration. So that's a little bit of a juggling act, and I appreciate all the support that Future Directions provided, that safety net and kind of rules of engagement. But it's certainly something to remember, is when you're over there for a year, it's hard not to go native, but you need to remember that at the end of the day, you're serving the organization that you came from, which I know and love, which is the Corps of Engineers.
I think that this detail gave me a different awareness about issues. Understanding the political implications of certain decisions is definitely something important to keep in mind, even though we as federal employees are not part of the political sphere. It definitely is important to understand the political aspects of issues and projects going forward. As Mackie said, our congressional interests, they want us to succeed as an agency. They appreciate the work we do and support the work that we do overall. And that's why communication and transparency are also really important, is something that I learned while I was over there. It really helps the Corps to be open and honest about issues we are experiencing on projects that, could potentially delay them, or other things that are out there that could affect our projects. And so one of the things I learned is definitely it is helpful to inform our congressional interests early about these issues and to be as transparent as possible, for sure. And I would also second that, I got to work with some districts and divisions that I haven't worked with frequently. So Chairwoman Capter is the chair of the Energy and Water Subcommittee. And so I got to work with the Buffalo District and LRD significantly, and really appreciated their timely responses on questions about her projects, the projects within her district that she was really interested in. And so, I think that open communication really helped achieve better outcomes. And one last thing I do have to say is, I don't think I had any meetings that were set up among Hill staff that were longer than 30 minutes. They were typically like 5 or 15 minutes. The longest meetings that I had while I was over there were with the Corps. So one of the things I think we also need to bring back is to try to make our meetings shorter and more efficient, and get to the point as much as we possibly can. I feel like our standard mode over here at the Corps is to set meetings for an hour, but over there it's like try to do it in 15 minutes if you can.
Absolutely. That was the standard time on my Outlook calendar on the Hill was 15 minutes because those were the segments that you worked in. It's a great point.
Yeah, I can definitely get behind the 15-minute meetings. I think that's a great idea that we should take and apply to the Corps. And it's interesting hearing both of you talk about the relationship between kind of Congress and the administration and working on the other side of the fence. And it kind of brings me back to the beginning of, civics and realizing that these agencies work for the administration. So we are, as a Corps of Engineers, part of the administration, the executive branch. And then you have obviously the Congress that provides the authorization and the funding for us. So I guess, we are near the end of our time together, but I really want to hear from both of you. What was the most surprising thing from your detail? And is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
I think you hear a lot about the partisan nature of DC. I wasn't as exposed to that. I think working for a committee, even though I worked for a House majority, what I saw is that majority and minority do really try to work together and support member requests from both parties where they can. I mean, obviously there's still disagreement, but they do try to work together. And for the most part, I thought had a pretty good working relationship. On the subcommittee, House minority only has one staff member working on energy and water development. So we would help her where we could with certain activities, just certain information that we were compiling, share that with her when appropriate. And so I do think there was a better working environment than I thought there would be going into this. And, in terms of anything else to share, I really thought this was a fantastic opportunity. Yes, it was a lot of work, a lot of long days and long weekends, but I'm really thankful for the opportunity and for the Corps allowing me to do this opportunity. And I would definitely encourage others to apply.
Yeah, Lauren, that's a great point. And one that I would add as well is that, between the committee staffers and what goes on inside those offices and those cubicles, it really, in my experience as well, was pretty much a bipartisan effort. And, everyone wants to get a bill across the floor. So to do that, you obviously have to find common ground. And I worked on both an EPA kind of themed bill, and then I also worked on some core specific packages for WRDA 2022. And so those were kind of different committee staffers that we dealt with on minority. Both of those relationships were positive. And, when we present those negotiated pieces of ledge text forward to the staff director and then to the boss, for the most part, they were like, yep, that looks great, because they know that they're trying to accomplish what is in the realm of achievable. So that was certainly my experience as well on the authorization side. I will say for my personal experience, what I was most surprised at was, of course, the pace. I mean, we worked until sometimes, if there was a bill on the floor, we were in the office until 1:30 in the morning doing go backs for amendments. So whenever an amendment was presented on the floor, we immediately had to come up with a position and a statement for the committee chair to say, to either encourage or discourage people to vote positive or negative on it. The long days and long hours, while I expected it, you can't get a feel for it until you go through the intensity of it. But I will say what I was most surprised about in my personal experience was honestly the amount of latitude I was given, and how much I felt like the committee and the senator that I work for listened and wanted to know my opinion. Trust me, there were days where I was getting coffee and making file labels and formatting spreadsheets and things like that. But by the end of my detail, I was pretty much single-handedly kind of handling his meetings and the memos. I would write them and they would be at 95%. I was able to staff the senator personally, and at the end of the day, it was really kind of gratifying to know and understand and feel like, I had gained a larger perspective that was valued when we talk about these national policy issues. So I'm tremendously grateful for it. I think it really opened my aperture in terms of my view of the Corps and how we interact. It's tremendously valuable for me personally and anyone who does these details. Once you understand the process the way you do, then you're able to leverage that back in the organization. And that's of tremendous value to the enterprise, in my opinion. If you're in the civil works arena and you're looking to kind of broaden your horizons and understand some of these national issues, then I encourage you to put these types of details on your IDP and talk with your supervisor about your, 3, 5, 10-year plan and make this part of your development goals, because it's not only tremendously valuable for the employee, but it's tremendously valuable to the enterprise to bring that knowledge back.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. And I just have to say, I don't think I would ever know as much about the Corps' budget and the whole budget process unless I had this opportunity. So I would just really second everything that Mackie said.
Thank you both for being here today for this edition of Inside the Castle. We appreciate you and your insights. To our listeners, we want to hear from you. What topics are important to you and people you are interested in hearing from? Until next time, be safe, be innovative, and be revolutionary.
Thanks for joining us for this Inside the Castle podcast. To provide your feedback, email us at cw.infrastructure.team@usace.army.mil. Stay tuned for additional Inside the Castle podcasts as we explore life inside the Corps and revolutionize civil works together.